The hierarchy of what is real. The metronome had been ticking for 11 years, and Vera Semyonovna Popova had long since stopped hearing it. That was the first thing her new assistant noticed when he arrived in October, not the smell of the laboratory, which was considerable dog and steel, and the faint sweetness of processed meat, but the fact that the woman at the central desk did not look up when the clicking began. 120 beats per minute, mechanical and absolute, and she sat reading with her tea going cold beside her, as though the sound were weather, or the movement of her own blood. His name was Dmitri Alexeyevich Laron, 26 years old, fresh from his postgraduate work in Novosibirsk, where he had studied sensory thresholds in pigeons, and knew almost nothing about dogs. He stood in the doorway with his coat still buttoned and watched her turn a page. "Close the door," she said, without looking up. "They can hear the corridor." He closed it. The metronome continued. From behind the inner partition came the sound of an animal shifting its weight. The laboratory occupied 3 rooms in the basement of the institute on Butlerova Street, and it had been Vera Semyonovna's domain for 9 years, since she had taken it over from a colleague who had gone to Leningrad. She was 43. She wore her hair pinned severely, and her hands, when she worked, moved with the economy of someone who has performed the same tasks so many times that motion has been refined to its essential minimum. She was not unkind. She was, Dmitri came to understand, simply organized around something other than the social rituals most people used to fill the spaces between thought. The dogs were named Max, Snezhok, and Shustrik. Max was a large brown mutt with a calm disposition and a paw that lifted readily, almost eagerly at the appropriate moment. Snezhok was smaller and nervous, white with one gray ear, and he watched the food bowl with an intensity that was almost philosophical. Shustrik, the name meant something like Quickster, the lively one, was the animal that most interested Vera Semyonovna, because Shustrik was the most purely himself. He responded to nothing but what his nature told him to respond to, and his nature told him that food was food and that clicking was irrelevant. This was the problem she was trying to solve, though problem was not quite the word she would have used. "What we are studying," she told Dmitri on his second morning, standing before the apparatus with a piece of chalk and a small blackboard she had propped against the wall, "is not behavior. Behavior is what you see. We are studying the structure underneath." She drew a vertical line and then branched from it 2 smaller lines, one higher than the other. "Every nervous system organizes its world into a hierarchy," she said. "It must. It cannot respond equally to everything. The organism would be paralyzed, lost in information. So the brain ranks its inputs. Some signals are attended to immediately, reflexively, without any learning required. The newborn already knows what matters: warmth, the particular chemistry of milk, the specific pressure of a mother's body. These are not learned responses. They are structural. They come with the architecture." Dmitri looked at the branching lines on the blackboard. "And the dogs?" "The dog sees food at a distance and its paw lifts. This is a natural, conditioned reflex. It developed during the individual life of each animal, yes, but along channels already prepared by evolution. The dog is auditory by dominance. Its brain is organized to attend to sound above other modalities. And yet," she set down the chalk, "when we place a metronome in the room, the dog barely notices. The click means nothing compared to the bowl. The hierarchy is given. And you want to change it." She looked at him then with something that might have been approval, or might simply have been the attention she gave to any accurate statement. "I want to understand whether it can be changed," she said, "and if so, how." Sac the apparatus was her own design, developed over years of incremental adjustment. The dog's right front paw was attached by a soft leather strap to a lever. The lever, in turn, was connected to a mechanism that moved the food bowl along a track. When the lever was depressed, the bowl rolled forward through a hole in the table until it was within reach. But the connection between lever and mechanism was not fixed. A secondary device, controlled from Vera Semyonovna's desk, could couple or decouple them. When the metronome ran at 120 beats per minute, the lever was connected. When it stopped, the connection was severed. The paw could move all it liked, straining against the leather strap, and the bowl would not come. The dogs did not know this at first. Dmitri's role in those early weeks was to record. He sat at a secondary desk with a notebook and marked down the trials in careful columns, whether the paw moved, whether it moved during or outside the metronome's action, whether saliva was present, how many drops, how many seconds between stimulus onset and motor response. The recordings from the mechanogram told him what the paw had done. His job was to understand what the dog had believed. In Shustrik, Vera Semyonovna said one afternoon, reviewing his notes, the reflex to the metronome fails nearly 100% of the time. He does not lift his paw when the metronome clicks alone, because he doesn't think it matters, because the sight of food dominates the control of his movement. The metronome is present, but physiologically it is invisible. The natural conditioned complex holds the high position in the hierarchy, and from that position it exercises an inhibitory effect on everything below it. Asratian called it induction. The dominant stimulus suppresses the weaker one, not by absence, but by active interference. She tapped the column of numbers. Shustrik is the purest case. Max is more flexible. He fails the metronome trials only 30% of the time. Snezok is between them. Dmitri looked at the data and thought of the pigeons he had worked with in Novosibirsk, how they would stand at a window and follow the vertical bars of light with their whole attention, pigeons raised from hatching in cylinders painted with vertical stripes, who had never learned to see horizontality at all. The feature detectors in their visual cortex had literally not formed. The experience had shaped the structure. He thought of Blakemore's Kittens, similar work, Western, which he had read in a badly photocopied English reprint. Kittens raised with only horizontal stripes who were effectively blind to vertical edges, who would walk into a table leg they could see but not recognize as an obstacle. The question, he said slowly, is whether experience can work in reverse. Whether you can take something that the structure already encodes as important, the sight of food, the biological given, and demote it. Vera Semyonovna did not answer immediately. She looked at the mechanogram strip, the line of the paw's movement, its rises and falls like a simple form of language. That is the question, she said. The training proceeded. Each session followed the same sequence. The food bowl was presented at a distance, held there for 10 seconds, and during that time the lever was disconnected. The paw could lift, and it did lift, in all three dogs. Shustrik's with particular urgency, but nothing moved. The bowl remained on its track, then the metronome started. 120 beats per minute, the tempo of a moderately hurried heart. The lever connected. If the paw lifted now, the bowl came forward. Dmitri watched Shustrik most carefully, because Shustrik suffered most visibly. There was no other word for it, though he understood that Vera Semyonovna would have used a different one. The dog saw the food, his whole body oriented toward it. Ears forward, nose working, the deep biological certainty that this was the real thing, that this was what mattered, and his paw rose, and nothing happened. The bowl sat in its inaccessible position, close enough to see, close enough to smell, and the lever's motion accomplished nothing. He did this again and again, trials 18 through 50. the paw lifting, and the world failing to respond. Only when the metronome began, only then did the connection hold, did action produce its consequence. He looks confused, Dmitri said one evening, after Shustrik had been returned to his kennel and the lab was quiet except for the cooling of the pipes. He is reorganizing, Vera Semyonovna said. She was writing up the day's data. The nervous system cannot sustain indefinitely the prediction that a signal will be followed by consequence if that prediction is consistently violated. The hierarchy is not a fixed monument. It is a working model of the world. But the sight of food is real. It is the food. She set down her pen. This, Dmitri understood later, was the center of the whole inquiry, the thing she had been circling for years, the question that kept her here in this basement laboratory with its 3 dogs and its metronome. The unconditioned stimulus, she said carefully. The true unconditioned stimulus for salivary secretion, Pavlov was very precise about this, is only those properties of food toward which saliva itself is directed. The chemical contact, the dissolution of substance in the mouth. Everything else, the sight of it, the smell, even the sound of the bowl on the track, all of that is already conditioned, already learned. The animal acquires these responses during its individual life, even if the channels for them are prepared in advance by the species. She paused. The brain does not follow the flow of stimuli falling upon it. It organizes them. It imposes structure on the world rather than merely receiving it. Dmitri wrote this down. Then he sat looking at what he had written. He had come to this laboratory knowing about pigeons. He had known about dominant sensory modalities, rats organized around proprioception, pigeons around vision, dogs around hearing, and he had understood this as a fact about animals. He had not understood it as a fact about all perceiving things, which spent their existence inside a hierarchy they had not entirely chosen, attending to what evolution or experience had placed at the top, allowing the rest to fall into background noise or context or extinction. He had not understood how contingent the hierarchy was, how it could be rearranged, how the thing that felt most real, the smell of food, the sight of it, the ancient unmistakable signal of nourishment, could be demoted by the systematic redesign of consequences, until the animal waited in stillness for a mechanical click before it would reach. He thought, what is the metronome in my own life? He thought, what have I been trained to wait for, and by what arrangement of consequences? And does the waiting feel like wisdom, or like waiting? He did not say any of this. He looked at his notebook. Shustrik, he said, at trial 286. He waited for almost 40 seconds before the metronome started. He saw the food and he didn't move. Yes, that's not nothing. No, she said, it is a very great deal. They published the following spring. The paper was careful and precise and made no claims beyond the data. It noted that the dominance of the natural condition complex, the hierarchy's innate organization placing biological signals above artificial ones, could be functionally reversed through the systematic application of differentiated reinforcement. It noted that this reversal was not achieved uniformly across individuals. Max more flexible, Shustrik more resistant, Snezhak between them, because the individual nervous system brought its own character to any training, its own degree of structural commitment to the given hierarchy. It noted that restriction of signaling from the natural conditioned stimulus, the functional blocking of biological information, increased the efficacy of the artificial signal, that the artificial could rise only as the natural was, if not silenced, at least interrupted. What the paper did not say, what could not be said in a paper of this kind, was what Dmitri Alexeyevich Lurin had come to think about in the months that followed. That the experiment raised a question it did not ask. If the hierarchy of attention was not fixed, if the most biologically compelling signal could be demoted by sustained and systematic experience, then the world each of them inhabited was not the world as given, but the world as organized, arranged by contingency and repetition into a ranked structure that felt like reality, but was in fact a particular solution to the problem of reality, one solution among others that might have been, that might yet be. He thought about this on the train back to Moscow after Christmas, watching the birch trees pass in the white light, their vertical lines repeating. He had been raised, as all organisms were raised, inside a cylinder of particular stripes. He had learned to see certain things and not others. The features his detectors were built for were not the only features that existed in the world, but they were the ones that moved the bowl. Vera Semyonovna, he understood, had always known this. It was why she did not hear the metronome. She had lived so long inside its action that it had risen to the top of her hierarchy. Or perhaps it had never been at the bottom. Perhaps she had always been organized around the artificial, the constructed, the deliberately imposed signal rather than the natural appetite. Perhaps that was what it meant to be a scientist, to choose to hear the click. The train crossed a frozen river, and the white light came through the window at a low angle, and lay across his notebook where nothing new was written. And somewhere in Moscow, a metronome continued its count at 120 beats per minute, indifferent to whether anyone was listening, maintaining its tempo with the tireless accuracy of a thing that did not know what it was signaling, or to whom, or whether the bowl would ever come.